Hi, this is a virtual coffee chat that I had with Sari Botton today, December 14th. And I want to read an intro to who she is so that when you come right in the middle of the chat, you'll understand who you're listening to. She wrote this book, and this is what she's referring to. And you may find yourself Confessions of a Late Blooming Gen X Weirdo. And we're talking about that in relationship also to my book, The Mortality Shot, which she also did the blurb for, one of the blurbs. So that's what we're doing, is talking about these two books that just came out. And she is a writer and editor living in Kingston, New York. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and elsewhere. She's a contributing editor at Catapult and a former essays editor for Long Reads. She edited the award-winning best-selling anthologies Goodbye to All That, Writers on Loving and Leaving New York, and Never Can Say Goodbye, Writers on Their Unshakable Love for New York. She teaches creative writing, creative nonfiction at Wilkes University, Catapult, Bay Path University, and Kingston Writers Studio. She publishes the newsletters Oldster Magazine, Memoir Monday, and Adventures in Journalism. In fact, I met her when I submitted something to Oldster that she published, and that's how we became friends. So without further ado, I'm just going to let you hear the chat where she starts talking about the book and what how she put that together. Thanks.
For many years, I was avoiding putting it out, finishing it, publishing. I was very conflicted, very anxious about people in my life being upset with what I wrote. And it's a good thing I didn't publish it sooner, because it took me a really long time to find the lens through which I wanted to tell all of the stories, the frame for it all. And really what the difference is between just, ramblings and art is a frame. You need to frame it. And when I was working on a piece in the book called My Hysterectomy, a Love Story, well, before I wrote it, I had this experience where I was in a fertility clinic at like almost 41 with my husband. And I knew in the waiting room that I didn't belong there, that it wasn't really what I wanted, but I didn't think I was allowed to know that. But I heard David Byrne in my head really loudly, basically saying, and you may find yourself in a fertility clinic, and you may ask yourself, what the hell am I doing here? And I realized that that is the theme. That is what has happened to me so many times. So many times in my life, I've gone in a misguided direction because I didn't really know who I was, or didn't feel entitled to know who I was and embody who I was. And so I was like, one of those, what do you call those wind puppets that they have, where, it like flops in the wind at a car dealership. And it took me, there were so many different places in my life where I wasn't myself, and it ultimately brought me to a place where I was in a crisis of like, okay, now how do I get out of this, and where should I be instead?
Yeah, and what I love about your writing and what you've done in your confessions, and I love that you call it confessions, because of course it reminds me of St. Augustine as well, and it's wonderful, is that you are very vulnerable. You talk about all that stuff. You're not like, and here's this is the Sari Botton self-help book. It's like, it's more about, here I am, and here's where I was, and this is how that conflict emerged, and this is how it plays out now. Like, you're not even, it's also even though you aren't writing it all in the present tense, it feels like that. It feels like we're there with you on that ride, right? Which is
some of the pieces
awesome.
are written in present tense. Like, some of the stories just felt like they were more, it just felt more appropriate to tell those stories as if they were happening in the immediate. But yeah, it's definitely not self-help, but it is. What I realized was that by the time I got to the place where I was finishing the book, revising the book, refining the book, it was really not just about me. It was about phenomena that other people were experiencing as well, which I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers saying, you told my story without really the same specifics. And I've heard this from men, women, Gen Xers, boomers, millennials, and that's really satisfying.
Yeah, no, I believe me, I get that. It's amazing when that happens, and especially when you know the person's specifics are different, but it's like, okay, because I think, it seems like something about telling that level of truth, meaning going, into all the details and not just the surface of it, or not even just one layer down, but all the layers down. I think people, a lot of people, well, I think probably everyone to some degree goes through that, those levels of questioning. Um, yeah. Oh, bless you.
Excuse me. Thanks.
And yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned, but Sari is just finishing up her COVID journey. So I know she didn't want to talk about it, but I got it in March 2020,
Yeah.
and she's just like crawling out of it now. So it's like on top of everything else, we have that in common. Yeah, so I'm wondering, actually, I'm thinking maybe it would be nice if you read the piece we were talking
Yeah,
about
sure.
before, just so
Sure.
people can hear it and get a sense of this, so I'm not just talking about it in general.
Sure. Sure.
So go for it if you like.
I'm going to read a piece called Elegy for the Non-Creepy Realtor. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm just going to read it. In the summer of 2013, my Gmail was hacked. Every single person on my contacts list received a note from me announcing I'd become a RE/MAX real estate agent. It was a convincing facsimile, complete with the red, white, and blue RE/MAX parachute logo. Click here to view listings, it lied, luring recipients instead to a link that ensured they themselves would contract the email virus, then unwittingly pass it on to others. Cue the succession of annoying replies, random contacts admonishing me to change my password, otherwise intelligent people duped by the scheme, believing it was really me. Don't you think you should at least ask me how I've been before you start sending me real estate listings? Wrote someone I'd briefly flirted with more than a dozen years before. Wow, small world, gushed a new acquaintance in earnest. I just got my real estate license too. Emails like those irked me the most. They were cruel reminders that publishing and digital media were in such a state of free fall, although not nearly to the degree they are now. It seemed plausible that I might have given up on writing and started selling houses instead. Those notes also reignited an uncomfortable, long-standing internal debate over whether the taxing, suboptimal mercenary work I've juggled for decades under the banner of freelance writing an article or essay here and there, but much more ghostwriting of other people's books, slinging ad copy, plus editing and teaching, has actually hindered my progress toward becoming a different kind of writer, the kind I've always wanted to be, of memoir and fiction. It's a question I still ask myself daily. Would I be more successful with my personal writing by now at 57 if my day job were in a completely unrelated field? Some of my colleagues seem to believe that's the way to go. In recent years, I've been hearing about writers in my Gen X demographic taking jobs in real estate, one of the more flexible, potentially decently paying occupations that, say, a middle-aged writer can qualify for with relatively little prior training. First, it was the former bureau chief of an NPR affiliate station. Next, a colleague from a magazine I once worked at. At the time my email was hacked in 2013, the most notable writer to add realtor to her resume was Maggie Estep, a slam poetry icon of the 1990s and author of 7 critically acclaimed novels, whom I admired. Maggie wrote on her popular blog about having difficulty supporting herself in the crumbling publishing economy, where book advances and fees for writing assignments were steadily plummeting, where being a freelance writer, as I've been for 2 decades, had become a ridiculous proposition for anyone but the independently wealthy. The writing biz has changed and my income from it is modest, she wrote. Being broke isn't very interesting anymore. Teaching yoga, her first sideline, hadn't turned out to be an effective means of financial support either. So I'm going to real estate school, she wrote. I didn't know Maggie well at all, even though she contributed an essay to the first edition of Goodbye to All That, Writers on Loving and Leaving New York, an anthology I had edited, in which she wrote about quitting New York City for upstate, just as I had. It was the beginning. I was just beginning to get to know her when, in February 2014, she had a sudden heart attack and left this world too soon. In the 90s, I'd idolized her. She was this cool, sexy punk rock feminist poet and spoken word star with an acid wit. After her death, I started reading her blog. In the final months before her death, Maggie wrote more there about her new profession. It was unnerving for me to learn that this accomplished writer and performer who'd once been able to earn at least a good portion of her living, sometimes all of it, from her creative output, was no longer able to do so, that she was now becoming a real estate agent for real. I mean no disrespect to real estate agents. They work hard in what is a demanding field. I've heard the few I'm acquainted with talk about having to frequently update their licenses with more classes and certification. I've also heard them gripe about squiring some of their clients around from home to home to home to home for months on end without it ever yielding a sale, all while working solely on commission. But the field also has some notorious image problems. Like salespeople in certain other fields, some realtors are perceived as hucksters, deceptively ameliorating less desirable listings with euphemisms like cozy for small and convenient to everything, often meaning right on the highway, using bait and switch advertising, or luring unwitting investors into problematic or non-existent developments, Glengarry Glen Ross style. Those image problems weren't lost on Maggie. At a memorial for her at Club Helsinki in Hudson, New York, Steve Buscemi read aloud an email she'd sent him, letting him know about her new profession and asking for buyer and seller referrals. A lot of realtors are kind of creepy, she wrote. So I guess my angle is that I'm the non-creepy realtor. After she died, a close friend of Maggie's told me that in ways, real estate seemed like a perfect fit for her, that she had been given to regularly poring over listings and looking at properties just for fun, often trying to match friends with the perfect homes for them. But scrolling through her blog, it becomes evident that Maggie had pretty mixed feelings about real estate as a job. In a post entitled Kill the Poor, she wrote that while she was happy she'd passed the first part of her real estate exam, my soul may be a little sick. I met several interesting and lovely people who I know will be honorable in their future real estate dealings, but mostly real estate school taught me a lot about capitalism, the killing of nature, and why most folks are suspicious of real estate agents. This was after one of the lecturers, whom she dubbed Mr. Kill the Poor, had talked blithely about such mercenary endeavors as evicting long-standing, low-paying tenants. She lamented, too, no longer having the luxury of writing all day at home. I'm having to learn to do what thousands and thousands of people do in this world, snatch tiny windows of writing time when I can and when and where I can. Sometimes it sounded as if she were trying to convince herself that taking a day job as a realtor was okay, a move that could possibly help her writing, maybe leading her to clients who'd inspire fictional characters. It's kind of fitting that in my nascent realtor career, the sellers I'm representing have a house that belonged to a gangster, she wrote after checking out a home that had once belonged to Legs Diamond. I've had a 15 plus years love-hate relationship with the Angel Makers, the female gangster book I've written seven times and not gotten right yet. I am soaked in gangster lore, and now I'm selling a gangster house. Never mind that it's on a busyish road and vaguely in the middle of nowhere. I instantly knew I was destined to sell this house. She sounded resigned to making peace with her new circumstances. For me, selling real estate in an honest way while writing books I care about is a good path, my next adventure. And it seems as if for the brief time she worked in the Halstead office in Hudson before passing away, Maggie did manage to also focus on her writing, which is more than I can say for myself with all the writing related work I do for a living. Even at times when I've lucked into short-term, undemanding, higher paying dream gigs, I've found that working with words all day, whether at home or in a proper office, doesn't afford me the time or headspace for the writing I really want to do. Despite this awareness and publishing steadily diminishing returns, I find myself obstinately resistant to the idea of giving up and finding a different kind of day job. For one thing, I am short on other marketable skills, but more than that, I'm too spoiled by years of making my own schedule and working from home to embrace showing up in an office and at the times someone else tells me to be there, a boss. The irony is that I'm kind of lonely at home, and with no boundaries between my living and workspaces, I'm never not working. What's more, as a freelancer, I answer roughly 9 bosses at any given time. The biggest obstacle to other platforms I'm sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied. The biggest obstacle to other forms of gainful employment, though, is probably my misguided, stubborn pride in telling people I'm a writer, and that other than the 3-month stint behind the costume jewelry counter at Macy's just after graduating from college, I have supported myself solely with writing and writing-related jobs. Never mind that a good portion of the writing-related work assigned to me is work I probably wouldn't do if there weren't a paycheck at the end of it. The validation of my title still makes me feel accomplished. What's more, I've accrued seniority here, something I'm too old to accrue in any other field at this point. The latter might be collapsing. Some might argue it already has, but I'm still holding on to my rung for dear life. Do not attempt to strip me of the false sense of success and security that I cling to. Because if I quit freelancing and become a real estate agent or lab technician, wait person, barista, cashier, nutritional counselor, whatever, and I still fail to produce and succeed with my real writing, then what and whom do I have left to blame? I suppose then I'd find out just how much I really want to write. Maybe I'd find that the physically draining nature of my gainful employment as a writer, editor, teacher is merely an excuse, that what's really stopping me from succeeding as a writer are fear and procrastination. Just 2 weeks before she died, Maggie wrote about her own tendency to procrastinate, as if there were time for that. I'm now quite certain there isn't. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Sorry, I
Thank
love
you.
that piece. It's so funny because I was getting prepared for this, and I remembered that one, and I don't know why I just was drawn to it because we had been talking about you reading another piece, and I was like, I like this one. And
Thank you.
I think there's so many things I love about it. I mean, I'm just going to pick a couple because just it struck me, especially like she dies. I mean, she died in her early 50s. She was a yoga teacher. She's clean and sober. This is not the person you're expecting to pop off, And I remember it really well, actually, but I didn't know her personally, but I knew, her friend circle, and I was just like, what just happened? And I feel like that kind of moment, right? I mean, that back to the mortality part, like though they really just like, whoa, right? And I don't know.
Yeah, that was just, she died 2 days after she did a reading for me in Rhinebeck that I was supposed to be at, but I got
Whoa.
stuck in Florida because I was sick. And she did a reading for a goodbye to all that reading. And then 2 days later, in the middle of a conversation, she had a heart attack and died.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
image, it freaked me out. And, I have other stuff in the book about death and about Maggie's death in particular.
Mm-hmm.
But it really kind of made me realize my own mortality and that anybody could just drop dead at any time.
Yeah, I mean, it focuses the mind and in that way. And it's interesting because in another piece of yours you wrote about, and I've touched on it in my own writing too, that you were doing it in a self-deprecating way, but nonetheless, just the Buddhist idea of like you should always be focused on the fact you die. And I think that's what they mean, not to be morbid, but it's just like, oh my God, this is a limited time offer. This is not like forever. And obviously, as we get older, that becomes more obvious. But then, especially when it's somebody like that, where you're just like, oh crap, this is not like, didn't see that coming, at all. Like there wasn't,
I did
it's
later learn some things. I learned that her father had died. I forget what they call it. It's like sudden death syndrome or something.
Mhm,
Her father had died in his 50s, had a heart
mhm,
attack in his sleep and died. Like it's, I think, somewhat hereditary. Um,
mhm,
but um, but it really, I really thought a lot about so many things. You know, she was in her early 50s. She was, you know, struggling with the writing question, like making a living as a writer. She was
yeah,
someone who had made her living
right,
as a writer.
yeah,
She was
mhm,
one of the lucky ones. She had published 7 novels. She had been this sensation. She was on MTV, you know,
mhm,
she was like a big deal. She was a
mhm,
star. And then our field failed her, you know,
mhm,
and she was trying to figure out, you know, so these are things that I think about all the time, like how long will I be able to do what I love, even though, and how much of what I do I really love, you know, this balance between art and commerce, you know, how do we live as artists, and also in midlife, you know, as you get into midlife, as you get into your 50s, you start to wonder, like, how much time do I have? You
mhm,
know, how much time do I have on this earth? And I also talk in the book about how both of my grandmothers died in their 50s, one
mhm,
at 51, one at 55. Um, and I've been obsessed with this. I've now outlived them both. I'm 57. I do not have the as yet, I have not developed the conditions that killed them. But you know, it's interesting to me that, you know, I talk about being in midlife, but I could also be at the end of my life. Who knows? You know, who knows? The unusual thing about life is that you're living a story whose end you don't know.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. And in a sense, as you start thinking about it and writing about it as you do and as I did, um, you begin to realize like that is the story, like
Yeah,
of all the stories, that's the main one, because
yeah.
it's like if we don't share anything else, we share that, and that lack of knowledge for sure. And I wonder, I'm just curious as you're saying it, and I was just sort of doing the math as I tend to do very quickly. Just as you know, I'm restructuring my whole life because I found out I was autistic a couple of years ago. So on top of everything else, it's like, oh my God, like, who am I? And like surprise twat twist at 57, that's when I was 57. So and so you can fully understand how intense that was. And there was a reason I brought that up, not just to say that. I just totally forgot. Oh,
That's
yes.
okay.
So, yes, no, there was a reason. There was a reason. So I just wondered, because I know in the piece I'm going to read about my stepfather and his sudden heart attack, it had this effect on me. Did her, even though it wasn't, somebody directly related to you, do you think that had any effect on you working? Because that would have been around, I'm assuming around the time you're putting together stuff for this book or beginning to,
Well,
or
this
did it?
piece, there was a version of this piece that had appeared on a website called The Billfold.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote it in 2014.
Right.
Um, and it has been revised to reflect where I'm at now. About a third of the pieces in the book had been published elsewhere, but all of them revised to reflect where I am now. And you know, but as I was putting the book together, I realized that this piece really did belong in there because, you know, it kind of really touched on the how long do we have to live and how do we live our lives, and as artists, how do we support ourselves, and um yeah, uh you know, and here was this person who was larger than life, and then in 1 second, in the middle of a conversation with her ex-fiance, she just, boom, lights out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
um
think I'm going to use that moment to answer your writing with mine, if that's
Yes, yes, please. I
okay.
was really struck by that similarity that you write a lot about, you know, as a kid and older, this obsession with death, and this fear. So yeah, please read.
Well, and the reason I thought of it as soon as you said that is that the person I'm writing about here, and it's not clear in this piece, is my stepfather David, who also became a bit of a star. He was a playwright who had his first play on Broadway, and then he had a movie, and then he had a really hard time making ends meet. And he died of a sudden heart attack. He was in his early 70s, so it wasn't quite as extreme as what happened to Maggie, but
you have to wonder how much of the stress of trying to survive as an artist might have led to their heart attacks.
You betcha. And then in his case, I blame Trump, because Trump
Oh,
had
wow.
just gotten elected, and he was gay and a Vietnam vet who actually went to Vietnam, and he could have gotten out of it if he'd wanted to, and he went because he didn't think it would be fair for someone else to take his place. And boy, Trump was the word, for the whole
Yeah.
LGBT community, and for, and honestly, I feel like I feel like that. I mean, he had some issues in this and that, like that, he wasn't a perfect man, but I really feel like that was the stress that, that on top, it was like the final insult. It was the final fucking insult. But his death had a huge effect on me. But I'm just going to read this piece because it's more just about the thing we're talking about, and just the idea of what do you have time for, and what do you forget, and what do you just fucking forget. It's called Too Fucking Late for All That. So if you have a problem with my language, just go away now. So forget about it. Okay, so how do you talk about something you missed that's so obvious, so blindingly obvious, and so irrevocable when someone dies? Are you hearing the siren I'm hearing right now? I don't know whether I've got my, okay, you're not. Okay, good. I'm glad about that, because they're so loud outside. Anyway, I'm going to start over. So how do you talk about something you missed that is so obvious, so blindingly obvious, and so irrevocable when someone dies? I'm about to go up and help spread, hurl, sprinkle, lay. What is it you do with ashes anyway? That at a cottage. The cottage where we spent summers when I was little in Maine, in a scruffy cottage on what was a scruffy island in the 1960s and 70s, and then changed and is now unrecognizable and filled with McMansions dotting the back shore like ill-fitting suits on someone who'd rather be in jeans and t-shirt, and not trendy ones either. Here we will lay, sprinkle, hurl, spread my stepfather David's ashes into the Atlantic Ocean in Casco Bay, but not in front of what was our cottage that was sold for a large amount of money thanks to the priceless view and location on rocks that is not allowed anymore in these sensible, tedious, overpriced times, because David and his brother and sister could no longer afford the taxes and the necessary repairs. So we will go in front of a cousin's place next door. David himself had not returned to that cottage in years, this place where his mother died when he was in Vietnam, that had been his refuge as a child, that he had written about when it was owned by his great aunts, that his siblings sparred over as if it were the bones of their dead mother and two fathers, all dead early of alcoholism, far too early. But the cottage was the refuge, the place that rocked us all to sleep until it was the scene of everyone's Oedipal nightmares. And here is where I fell in love with Maine and the ocean and never wanted to leave. And look how I'm not even writing about David and what he meant to me, when that is precisely what I'm trying to write about, and failing. A point so sore, I, who can write about anything, can't write about because I missed it. I missed how of all of them, and there were 4, he was my actual father. I mean, not biological and not the one who looked fatherly. He was the last one from when I turned 17. But David was the one who I knew from age 3, the one who brought me to theater rehearsals and writing and the cottage and saved me from a very dangerous person, and who had a nervous breakdown that led to me living with my grandparents, and then wrote a play. And I came back, and everything was glamorous for a short time before it was clear he was gay, and my mother and he were divorcing, and then everyone started dying of AIDS except David, which made no sense to him or anyone else, but was true. And the party just stopped, and I became a teenager and know-it-all and thought I would change the world, and then I didn't. And David and I argued about so much, about theater, about my mother, about my first marriage, about alcohol consumption, about who got to tell the story, damn it. And so I fucking missed it. I missed that this is your father, the one you argue with, the one who gives it shit enough to challenge you, that is imperfect and sometimes you hate, but you never hate, and who hands you over to the world and trusts that you will kick its motherfucking ass, which he did. This is not to say my fourth father wasn't stellar. He was, and he provided levels of stability and nurture that no one before him did. But the fact is, I was already 17. I was already mostly grown. The crazed semi-anarchist scared out of her wits who directed plays, then wrote them and practically spit at anyone who tried to constrain her in any way. She was David's daughter. The one with both certain talents and an ability to self-destruct like nobody's business. David's daughter for sure. And how could I have missed it? The phrase ringing in my ears and making me cry daily is David saying to me after I had eulogized Tom, my fourth father, at his funeral, I'm so glad Tom could be a father to you. He meant it and said it kindly. Now I know it must have cost him, and I fear he died suddenly of a heart attack, so I could not say any of this to him, thinking he had not been a father to me, or maybe knowing he had been, but thinking I did not. In any case, what I'm trying and failing to write about is how you can miss something so obvious until it's too late.
Mm.
Oh,
Oh, that piece is so beautiful. It's so moving.
thank you.
Yeah, it's and it's so voicey. I love your voice, and I love, the way it's like written propulsively. And also there's a meta aspect to it where you talk about how, I'm not able to write about this. I'm trying to write about it and I'm not writing about it, but it's really, really beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it was one of those things. It is voicey. It was one of those things you just write. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't
yeah,
like I'm writing this for blah, blah. I just kind of wrote it because I had to write it. And there was a wonderful little press. I don't know if they're still out there, an online magazine called Burning House Press in the UK. And they had these kind of monthly editors do anyway. So somehow I sent it into that and they published it. But yeah, and every time I read it, it just chokes me up, and different parts do.
yeah.
But that was in 2000. It was right after Trump got elected. It was like December 2. It was just the end of that horrible year where like everybody died. I don't know. It was just like the rapture or something. And it did a lot, it changed. And actually that's when I stopped. It led me to a lot of things. And one of the things I left being an adjunct professor and started being a freelancer,
Really?
partly because I was just like, who's got the fucking time? Because I was, as an adjunct where I was, it was like Spartacus, it was just like basically just, I mean, not quite, because I technically was getting paid, but not enough to live on. And,
Yeah, no, adjuncting is
yeah.
really hard, really, really hard. I'm struggling with it, every semester. There's one aspect or another. It demands so much of you and pays you so little. But yeah, and did writing that piece have an effect on you in terms of like getting you to start writing the book, or were there other pieces or?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because the book is like yours, it's a compilation of things, and it
Right, and yours is different genres. Yours is a mix of
was,
genres. Mine is not.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a hybrid, and it's got some the childhood things are more in the short story genre. There's essays that are more like they're called hermit crab essays, like the list, essay about
Right. There's also like a
COVID.
screenplay or a drama,
A stage text.
stage
Yeah,
text.
this is
Yeah.
the stage text.
Yeah.
There's what it looks
Yeah.
like. I like to show this to show what the publisher had to deal with. Like, I'm like, and take a moment to realize what the publisher had to deal with. This is one of my stage texts, and these what happened is there was a call out. It was a different publisher, not the one that ended up publishing it, for a hybrid text where everything sort of fell together as a thing. And I realized from that was in 2019, 20, I don't remember precisely maybe 20, I don't know. And I realized I'd written all this stuff. No, it would have been 20, because I had, these are 2020, that I'd written all this stuff about mortality, and it was just sort of, and then I came up with the title. And at first I'd had a chapbook length, and then I added the stage text, which turned it into a book length. And the stage text came last, and is very much about recovering from COVID, and also beginning to understand the, not being neurotypical, all these kind of things were happening. And And the original publisher that asked for these, I sent it to, and they didn't take it, and they sent that, I don't know if you've ever gotten these, but what I call is the back jacket rejections, where they're so complimentary, but they're like, this is amazing for this reason and that reason and the other reason, but we're not going to publish it. But they're like, but we're sure you'll find a publisher for it. I'm like, well, I'm glad you are.
Yeah, I got a lot of those.
Great.
I got a lot of those.
Yeah. I'm sure you did, because not because you deserve them, but because you're doing something very specific. Anyway, it's like this kind of thing where people say, we want something innovative, whatever, and but they don't. And then I found this other publisher. Honestly, to be perfectly honest, I was scrolling through Instagram, like doom scrolling through Instagram. I don't even know why. And then I saw this book coming out from somebody I knew from theater. And I was like, wow, who published that? Because what it was her poems that she wrote with the safety pins when she was in a mental hospital. And I was like, okay, those people are serious. Like, whoever is publishing that, like, they're not just joking about we're on the edge, you're like really on the edge. And they published it with a handwritten anyway, I was very impressed. And I was like, who
what
are
is
these
the
people?
publisher's name?
It's Liquid Cat Press, actually. Here, I'll post I've just posted, that's actually my website, but if you go to it, you'll see their thing. I'm gonna post, I'll just post the thing with that. But it's called Liquid Cat Press. They're very new, actually. They just started earlier this year, and they've just come out kind of guns blazing. And with both very brave and not knowing a lot at the same time. So it's been a kind of, I'll be honest, it's been a bit of like a whirlwind. But the guy is wonderful, and they made this book, like this is a painting of mine. It was a self-portrait that I did. They wanted it as the cover, found a way to do that.
Oh, that's great.
So
I drew the cherry blossoms on my book.
Oh, I love that. I also love your cover.
I also have some drawings inside the book. Like
oh
this
my God.
typewriter,
right, of course you do.
which
and
is
those are
also
yours.
on my arm.
Right.
I have drawings, and I was so touched that my here's a compass I drew. I was so touched that my publisher was like, how about including some of your drawings?
Right.
I'm published with Heliotrope
right.
books.
Yes. Which is a wonderful publisher.
Yeah, they're right in the East Village, which is where a lot of my book takes place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a link to the book on Heliotrope, because it has several buy links, so that people can buy wherever they want to buy it.
Yeah, so does mine, happily. Like, that's the one I did from my site, but I'll actually do the one from Liquid Cat too, just so that people can see what they're doing. And yeah, I mean, so I think that's also this very interesting thing of the beauty and bane of working with very small publishers. I mean, I think Heliotrope's far more established than Liquid Cat. These are some millennials from California. Luckily, Jacob is in law school, so he was actually into the notes from the Authors Guild on the contract. So that was good. But that was pretty funny, actually. I was like, wow, you're actually interested in the Authors Guild notes. That's crazy. But just to work with that, first I had these dreams with another book, the book I wrote actually originally about my grandmother, that you published the essay that I wrote about her, about both of my grandmothers. The other one was exactly the opposite of her, literally exactly the opposite. And I haven't gotten that published yet. Again, that was meant to be published by a small publisher, but then COVID hit and they kind of freaked them out and whatever, a lot of things happened. But it's a lot. It's a lot, because I've had to do, and I think you have had to do, you have to do a lot of your own publicity, marketing and stuff.
I'm exhausted from it. I'm so tired of putting on the Sari show to sell books. I've been doing a lot of that.
Yeah, no, I know. And I almost felt bad about bringing you on here, but I was like, well, hopefully we can actually have a fun conversation too.
Yeah, no. Yeah, conversations are good. I am enjoying the book events. I'm just tired of telling people about them and trying to persuade them to come.
I know, I know, I know. And also, I don't know about you, but I am finding that that it's also incredibly hard to, I'm just trying to do this thing on my computer at the same time as I'm talking, which is a really bad plan. Okay, hold on. I'm putting this on here now. That is the hardest part. And I'm finding it hard. I'm trying to write a memoir about this, growing awareness of being autistic and what that actually means and how that lands at 57 and all these things. And I basically, because of this book coming out and my teaching, like I teach workshops and I edit and I coach, like I put all the little balls up in the air,
Mm.
and they're all writing balls, but it is exhausting. Like that's the other thing I really related to about the freelance thing, because it's like you're always working, right? I mean, it's just like constantly, it just
Yeah,
never ends.
the irony is like, oh, I don't have to have a boss. I can freelance. I
Yeah.
have 9 bosses,
Right.
there's always
Exactly.
somebody who wants something, needs something from me.
Yeah.
I juggle a lot of balls in the air, but I've also, I do have a chapter in the book called Adventures in Journalism, where I talk about, when I've tried to have jobs, it has not gone well. And
Yeah.
some of
Same
it has to
here.
do with the particular jobs. Every now and then I think about, like, should I be looking for, another job? First of all, I've
Mhm.
encountered age discrimination when I've tried to get editor jobs.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
but
real. That's a
then,
real thing.
like, every now and then someone will send me a listing and I'll be like, I'm doing my own things and they're going well. If I give them up, say I take a job and then 6 months later, some jerk buys the company and lays me off, and then I'm gonna have to start rebuilding my own things again. I
Yeah.
can't do that. I've found that media companies have become incredibly unreliable.
Hmm.
I was working at Long Reads for 5 years, and then all
Yeah.
kinds of crazy stuff happened. I left as a whistleblower.
Hmm.
And I was
Oh,
going to be
right.
fired anyway. So I left as a whistleblower before they could fire me. I've seen, I mean, look what's happening to Twitter. Look what's happened so many times to Medium. Every once in a while, it's this great opportunity for people, and then they pull the plug on half of their offerings. I think that media companies, you cannot bet on them. Whereas the wisdom used to be, well, get a real job with a real company. The real companies keep getting, what happens is, these billionaires buy local newspapers or websites, and what they do is they try and turn them into these, profit turning machines.
Hmm.
They cut pay, they fire people, and they try to do the least, similar thing to what the site originally did, for, just to make shareholders wealthy and CEOs,
Hmm.
it's always, it hurts the people who work there. And so, like, you can't bank on a job on a company.
Hmm.
And the same
Yeah.
with universities. I adjunct, like, all over the place.
Hmm.
And I also teach at Catapult, and I've also started my own thing, Kingston Writers Studio, which is now a Zoom school. And I'm realizing I need to offer more classes through Kingston Writers Studio because I can count on it. It's my own
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So I had to establish myself through various companies and, associations. But right now it's really hard to have faith in any of these companies.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I also, you know, partly because of how I was raised and who I was raised by and stuff, I was pretty hip to that. Like, and I watched Reagan get elected in 80 and I couldn't vote yet, but I was like, oh no. And literally everything I was afraid would happen happened. Everything. I mean, I should not have been that right at 17. I call myself like Cassandra of politics. It was horrifying. And all the termites that went in, now everything's just falling apart because nobody saw the termites. They just saw the glittering little facade and like, oh, look, this, that, the other. And it's
Yeah,
just
I cried the night Reagan was elected. I
me
was only
too. We should have been
14.
together.
Yeah, I was only 14, but I cried
I
and
did
cried.
too.
I
I
just
sobbed.
knew that it was a harbinger of terrible things to come. And I really think is at the root of these moments we're
It
living through
is.
right now.
It
It
is.
really is. And did you know that Make America Great Again was his slogan?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I watched
Oh,
the
yeah.
documentary about him last year, and I was like, oh boy, it was as bad, if not worse, than we thought it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's amazing because like I was on scholarship at this really posh boarding school. So the next day everyone was like, who cares? Great, we can be rich again or whatever. And I was like, I'm dying,
Yeah.
and literally like there were 3 other people that felt the same way. And but the rest, everybody else was just like whatever, or they just didn't care, or which was actually frankly most of them. And I felt so alone because I was crying by myself. You probably were too. I was like in a room by myself, like, well, now I know we should have been together. We should have found each other, man. Oh my God.
Let's go back in time. Let's get a time machine.
Exactly. We'll get our TARDIS and go back. Yeah, and glad to know someone. I'm not glad you were crying, but I'm glad to know somebody else was having this emotional reaction. But here we are. So it looks, there are so many people beginning to ask questions and stuff in the comments. What I'm going to do is ask those, if some of them are comments, if any of you actually want to ask a question, would you mind if you can find your little reaction button and just raise your hand, and then I'll let you unmute. Is that okay? Does anyone want, okay. Is that Priya? Is that you wanting to say something, or are you clapping? I can't quite tell. I'm not sure. I'm gonna send you an unmute thing in case. Oh no, you can unmute yourself now. I changed it. Never mind. You can unmute yourself, Priya, if you actually want to ask a question. I don't know if you did. I can't tell. You're too small. Anyway, you guys can unmute yourselves. So does anyone, or should I just read the comments, or you want to ask it? Okay, there's Robin. Robin, can you unmute yourself?
Oh yeah, I guess there's something
Oh.
where they can't mute themselves.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me sorry, my bad. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now you should be able to do it. And Priya, if you let me go to you first. Sorry, dear. There, hi.
No problem. Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
Priya.
Hi.
Good. We did our book launch together, Priya.
We
and
did our
That
book
was
launch
so
together, and we both were
cool.
talking about you,
Yay.
Sari, because
Yeah,
we all are Ulster fans.
And also
Yes,
contributors.
Yes, and Ulster fans and contributors, and it's been a wonderful community. And I loved reading with Julia. I love the topic. I was really struck by your piece, and it was as much a lament on aging as on the publishing industry. And I was wondering about your thoughts on this, that that many writers, artists, musicians, whatever you want, the artists in the larger sense of the word, try to create art, which is something that's free from commercial ties, and things that we don't think about. What do people want, and how can I feed them what they want? And that's how I imagine that you wrote your book. I just published my debut novel, and Woman of an Uncertain Age, and then we have to sell it like a product.
Yeah,
I am exhausted in it. There's that dichotomy there, right? You're making art,
definitely.
and then you're selling it like a product, trying to, whatever, people will tell me book talk, or, TikTok, or this or that, or, try this and this. I think there's a part of us that kind of, recoils at that, marketing type. But I was just wondering if you could talk about that struggle between making art like an artist and selling it like a commodity.
Yeah. I think, I think this is true of people with bigger publishers too, but especially with small publishers, you really have to do your own marketing to a large degree, unless you are like, rich, and it doesn't matter if your book sells, or you can hire an outside publicist. But it is a disconnect for me. And I'm okay at it, and I have had a good time with it, but it's not what I really want to be doing. I really want to be doing the writing. I do enjoy the readings. I enjoy engaging with people. I enjoy what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But the hawking it on social media and emailing people and, just really trying to get people to buy it, that to me is hard. It's a hard hat to wear. as a weird, artist. I'm also like, I'm not a good business person. I don't make good
Yeah.
business decisions. I mean, it's ironic because but I've learned a lot. I've learned how to compensate for my natural inabilities, or lack of affinity. But it makes me feel uncomfortable. It feels like, it gives me that feeling of listening to nails on a chalkboard, like, oh
Mhm.
no, I have to go annoy people and tell them to come to my reading. I have to get back out on Twitter and tell them to come to another thing. And, some of it is also, I try to fight back against this internal thing that I was taught, which is that I'm supposed to keep myself small. And
Right.
I've been sort of really fighting that tendency to believe that I'm not supposed to go out there and be proud of my work. So I did have a session with a publicist, during which she told me, step into your talent and own it and share it. So
That's
that's what I'm
good
trying to do.
advice.
Yeah, that was Lauren Sarand, and I did. After I had a wonderful session with her, I got her to do like a Q&A with me for the Memoir Monday
Oh,
series.
that's amazing.
I'll share a link to it here.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you felt this way, Priya, but I remember when Priya and I were having our book lunch together, I found it much easier to promote it. I could be like, and Priya will be there too.
Yeah, no, I found that easier too.
It's just so hard to be like, oh, please buy my book, or then please review my book if you liked my book, and just
Yes.
all those
Now come
kind
to
of
my
things.
opening. Now do this. Now share. Now it's like I feel like, like a begging bowl. And
I
Yeah.
know.
that the power that you have when you're creating, or the vulnerability, but even in that vulnerability, there's a power. But then to lose that and just be like, now I'm throwing myself to the, wings of commerce. With some people.
Yeah,
It's
it feels
interesting.
unnatural. I put a link to the video, but you have to
Right.
be a paying member of Memoir Monday, and it's not that expensive, and it's a great newsletter.
No,
So
that's good. No, I'm gonna keep. I'll definitely keep it. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. It's a pleasure to
Thanks,
meet
Priya.
you.
yeah, great to meet you too.
Thanks, Priya. Robin, your hand went down. Robin, I can't remember your last name. Robin Ryan. Yes. Do you want to ask a question?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to,
Okay.
I loved both of your pieces
Oh, thank you.
so much. I was driving home from my day job. I had been working on my first novel that I'm going to be
Oh.
querying next year. And now I'm 55. I was, I think, 35 when I started, but
Okay.
I have 3 children, and now I'm full time, and I had been freelancing. And it's interesting, I had lived in Kingston, I think, in a very different time. I lived in Kingston from 92 to 94.
Oh, it's a very different Kingston now.
Yes. I was writing for the Times Herald Record, and then I went to law school. But it's very dramatic with the difference. But I would have loved to have met you then. And of course, you guys didn't.
Time machine, get that time machine.
I know. So I know. So I want to hear about the writer studio, or that you mentioned. This is so great. And I really have enjoyed hearing you guys talk, and thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thanks.
And when I go out there, it's just so next year querying, it's just great to know other people have been doing this, and I don't anticipate age discrimination, although I've certainly faced it when I went back into the workforce. But maybe that's a question. Have you encountered that when you've been?
God, yeah, I have
Have
really
you?
encountered it. The worst
I mean, I
was
do anticipate it, but not in the same way, I guess.
the worst was when I interviewed for a job, and the interviewer, who is someone I know, said, "I didn't think a legend like you would be interested." And I thought, a legend? You just like, it was such a backhanded compliment. It was like, God, are you old? What are you doing here? I didn't get a second interview despite being a legend. And despite, everyone who knew me and knew about this job being like, okay, this should be Sari's job. And the person who got the job is 25 years younger than me.
Yeah,
So, but the
no doubt.
comment, you know, I'm surprised a legend like you is interested, says a lot. But I've
Yeah.
definitely encountered it. People are shocked that I apply for certain jobs. I don't do it anymore because it's humiliating. And also, as I said, like, I think that I have more faith in my own stuff that I'm creating than I do in trying to get a job with an organization that could all of a sudden change its mind about what it is or sell itself to some, horrible billionaire who's just going to break it apart,
Yeah.
Well,
I guess
something. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Do you think you have encountered discrimination in publishing contracts? I definitely in the jobs.
I don't know about that. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I haven't had that experience. So, I mean, I do think maybe there were people who were not interested in my book, publishing companies, because they thought, midlife, memoir. Yeah, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I would say also the interesting thing, and I think you've probably found this, sorry, I also teach workshops and stuff, is that in that instance, when you're working for yourself, bless you, my dear.
Thanks.
Then suddenly all your experience and age matters. Like, suddenly it gives you credibility. But when you're applying for a job, usually jobs that are open, this is exactly where I landed. I was like, I'm not going through this again. I can't deal with this anymore. And then also, if you're an adjunct and you're at a certain age, people think you're a loser. I mean, it's literally just what happens. I mean, and I even had people say that to me that were my age. I mean, it's just like, it's incredible. So, but when you're working for yourself, you end up in a different zone. And I do think there are publishers who do wrongly think people of a certain age, there is no audience, because actually there is, and it's kind of huge. It's a really ridiculous idea. And actually, I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a wonderful article. I'll see if I can find it, put the link from The Guardian, because The Guardian doesn't have a paywall. They've changed the tape. This is the art awards, but they've changed the Turner Prize. It's any age. And now the woman who won is 66, because they've begun in I think a Caribbean British woman. And it's like, they've begun to understand that emerging changes, because all this thing, like, look at all of our ages here and talking about querying in first books, right? That if you come from a certain class or a certain gender or a certain race or a certain whatever, a series of events in your life, disabilities, you name it. In my case, I'm realizing that was a big part. That these are things that make you emerging even though you're older. And that the idea of, and that, like, Sari, you were that thing about 5 over 50, right?
Yeah.
That's the first time poets and writers have done that, isn't it?
No, it's their 7th year. So, there are all these 30 under
great.
30 lists, 40 under 40. And Poets and Writers, 7 years going, has had a distinction, which is 5 over 50. And I was fortunate to be chosen. And I just posted in the chat a link to our video from the other night. And I'm also going to share a link to the feature in their magazine, which each of the 5 of us wrote an essay about our experience publishing later in life. So it was a real honor. Those lists can be really limiting. I mean, even 5 over 50 is very limiting, but it is nice to have an award that is an over instead of under, instead of like, who has, published their novel freakishly young, like this culture just really is obsessed with youth. So I was really grateful that Poets and Writers has this annually, 5 over 50, and that they chose me. And we did a wonderful reading the other night, and the link is there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted to say also about, because somebody else, I think it was Susan Nordmark, yes, emerging class, disability, sex is crucial. And I you know, gender, obviously. And now I'm realizing it's weird, kind of realizing I'm autistic and realizing how much that's held me back, not in the sense of what I can do intellectually or artistically, but the whole issue of dealing with certain kinds of social issues and certain kinds of weaseliness and certain kinds of things that you're supposed to be able to do without worrying about it. Apparently, I'm beginning to understand now. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know. I mean, really, I'm so naive. It's ridiculous, actually. And also I get burnt out really fast. Like I'm totally enjoying this. I'm loving every minute. And as soon as we get off, I'm going to totally crash.
Yeah.
You know, so like the masking and the needing to be on, and, you know, and yet this is part of, and yet I've barely been able to make it to a bookstore to ask them to carry the book. It's just like, there's so much stuff that's hard to do. And I've never, because I was gifted and I was supposed to rule the world because I went to one of those schools, you know, and instead I'm like here and going, what? And that's actually what I'm writing my memoir about, because it's just like putting together all of that and understanding what that means. And this isn't the only way. I mean, this is just one thing. I'm not, you know, declaring myself a victim or anything. I'm just saying it's like, there's all these various reasons we have that things go in a different way. And I think what I love about your book, Sari, to go back to our writing a bit, is, you know, you embrace that. You embrace the messiness, you know, and I think I do too, or I hope I do. And, you know, that's kind of it, right? Because the key to my mind, to surviving all this is the acceptance piece of like, okay, this is it. There is no like other it. You know, there is no like other place where it's all going to work out just fine. I mean, that's not happening. And here we are. And then like the more of that I can accept, including who I am, the messiness combined and all that, then I have a shot. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean a shot like to be famous or whatever necessarily. That would be a shock. But like, but just to kind of move through. So, oh, Robin,
Yeah.
Another Robin has a question. Robin, do you want to unmute yourself? I just saw you there.
As you may remember, Julia, your grandmother, Jane, I'm Julia's mother,
Oh, hi.
she dealt with, and this was in the 70s, in the mid-late 70s. She could not get her stuff published at all, even in the feminist world, which she was trying to break into. And she was in her late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
And she was seen as too old. She wasn't cool enough. I mean, she's very cool, but she
way
just
cooler than they were, to be honest, but okay.
Huh?
I said way cooler than they were. I said she was way cooler than they were.
Right, that's right. But they wouldn't give her the time of day. And she was the one, I don't know if you remember, where she said, never let anybody know you're over 49. For some reason, for her, 50 was the cutoff.
Interesting.
And she was so frustrated. And as you know, she was a brilliant writer, of which you have her files. But and it was in the feminist world, that too. I mean, that's what was so freaky to me. So anyway, I just wanted to say this seems to go on. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. I don't know. And you know, the reason the feminist thing struck me is that these are women supposedly trying to advance women. Now, granted, it was the mid-late 70s, and much of even the feminist movement by then had gotten commercialized, but still. Anyway, enough. Thank you for this conversation, the two of you. It's been fabulous.
Thank you.
Robin, just because of what you said, that's why when I got in touch with Sari, and I didn't know her at all when I got in touch with you about Jamie's writing, and it was exactly, I was having that moment of like, wait, she wrote about this, 50 years ago, like, and bless Sari, like that's the difference, is there are the Saris in the world, and there are people, no, but I'm serious, like what you're doing with Oldster, really, you guys, seriously, like, I mean, Memoir Monday too, for sure. But Oldster is just super special. Memoir Monday is
Thank
amazing.
you.
She compiles all this stuff. And I just, I mean, you have that same impulse I do to like bring everybody up with you. And it's like, and I know that
Definitely.
costs. I know it's
Yeah.
great. And I know it costs too. I just want to say that. I
Thank
believe
you.
me. So don't take that for granted. Give her some money for her thing.
Thank you. And I pay
Serious,
people.
man.
I pay people. So
She
I pay
does. She did.
contributors.
She paid me. Though my second one, I took payment in having the subscription because I wanted it. So anyway, but yeah, so but no, she's amazing. So we've got a couple more questions and only a few more minutes, and I don't want to take too much of Sari's time. So I don't know what your full name is, but A has a question. Can
Yeah,
unmute yourself?
I have a
Hi.
question. Hi, I put it also in the chat, but basically, I'm really resonating with this conversation about ageism. I'm middle-aged. I am over 50. I'm 51, and I'm trying to write a book. So I'm resonating with all of this, and also thinking about like audience, because like you were talking a little bit about marketing before, and I thought that was a really great question about balancing the art with the business. Going along with that, like I know that when I went to grad school and I've pitched books before that I've written and didn't go anywhere, but I definitely audience was something that was stressed when you're pitching a book. And so like particularly I'm just curious in terms of your audience, like because I imagine like when I was younger and the books that I was pitching, it was just like, okay, this is for, I guess, I was younger, so people who'd be interested in growing up in the 80s or something, just something that was attached to a certain culture or a certain, and I'm also queer. So, having it, and I'm also Latinx. So having that be my audience at some points, and then now being older and writing this, it's like, are they going to close me off because they think, oh, only people who are, such and such are going to be interested? And yeah, so any thoughts you may have about audience, like how to pitch it and how you feel about that?
Yeah, so there's a part in the in your book proposal that's where you're supposed to address who your projected audience is. It's in like the marketing statement of the book proposal. I hate writing book proposals, by the way. Hate. They are a necessary evil. But you're supposed to state in your marketing statement, who this book is for. I totally underestimated the breadth of my potential audience. And I think that I tried in saying that I was, the subtitle of my book. So it's, and you may find yourself Confessions of a Late Blooming Gen X Weirdo. I put Gen X in the title thinking that it would help, kind of narrow the audience, like capture an audience. But there have been so many millennials and boomers who've really loved my book that I almost sold myself short by saying Gen X. I could have just said a late blooming weirdo. I mean, there are a lot of Gen X references, but I've also my favorite story about a surprise audience is that I was taking a Lyft to an event in Brooklyn, and my driver was a 30-year-old Indian man. And we were just making small talk. What's your book about? And I told him, that it's a midlife coming of age memoir. And it's about, it starts off, I'm like 27 and I'm realizing I'm in a marriage that I shouldn't be in. And I realize I don't know who I am and I have to figure it out and I have to get out. And he stops me. He goes, "That's me." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm 30. And last year I got out of an arranged engagement that my parents set up and I didn't want to be in it. And they told me I had 1 year to get my shit together. And it's the end of the year and I am not ready. I've just scratched the surface. I'm just discovering who I am. And I don't want to be in an arranged marriage. And I don't want to marry an Indian woman necessarily. And I don't want to this and I don't want to that." And we kept talking. And by the end of the ride, he had ordered the book on his iPhone. And I was like, okay, and I've gotten a lot of responses from millennials, as I said, and boomers and men and women and people across the gender spectrum. So in a way, I almost think it's bad that we're required to identify an audience, because I think that can be limiting. I mean, you want to kind of say, maybe you want to list a bunch of groups that might enjoy your book, because that's less limiting. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
And I think also, I agree with you, Sari, so much, but I think what they want, like a book proposal person who's reading a book proposal wants you to make that decision, even if you shouldn't have to. And, you know, I agree with you on it 100%, but it is something they want you to think about. And the
Yeah.
other thing you can do is just look at the sheer numbers, because the numbers of people who buy books that are of a certain age is, you know, amazing. So go look for just go
Yeah.
find some numbers to back you up. It's kind of amazing. I want to get to Ara though before it's 6:15. Do you mind answering one more question, Sari? Or
No
are you good
problem.
to go? Okay,
Yeah,
I didn't
one
want
more
to keep you
question. Let's
past.
do it.
One more question. All right, you get the last
Okay,
word.
it isn't so much a question as a thank you to both of you. I'm a fan of the mortality shot. I love it. And now I'm going to go get it. You may find yourself. And
Thank you.
Yay.
and I've signed up for Oldster, so I'm going to dig in some more. But I want to say, hi, Robin. Robin and David introduced me to my first husband, the father of my
Oh.
children. One of whom is a writer and has a hard time. He's a man. He has a hard time getting published too. The curiosity for me is that ageism, I came up in the dance world and now I'm putting together a book of my scripts. And to hear you guys who are so accomplished talking about ageism in your 50s, I'm 75. I feel like I'm just beginning. And I think we have to just keep going. And I grew up as a modern dancer. It was really, really hard. There was no money in that world. So, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but we got to keep doing it, because there, as you say, sorry, the audience is there. The audience is wide. Everybody's going to be of a certain age at a certain point, if they're
It's
lucky.
true. And every time I gave up, I came back, and I'm, you know, and even with every publicity thing I've done, I've been like, oh, again. But then it's always paid off. I mean, this was wonderful. I'm so happy we did this. I've been looking forward to it, but it also, like, it was, you know, it's just really satisfying. And some of you will buy my books and sign up for things, but even more than that, you're validating my choice to go through with this book. You're letting me know that it, you know, that it resonates. And the same with Julia's, you know, it's really validating to hear you guys reflect back to us that what we're talking about resonates.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I just want to, you know, and I do just keep going. I mean, you know, I think that, you know, there is no age limit to beginning. There just isn't. There just isn't. You know, I just think of that. Didn't the movie take the David Bowie to absolute beginners? Like, you know, there's like, which is about, you know, somebody's in their 90s or 90s, you know, it's just, I think that there is this, you know, there is this ageism, there just is. But I think it's changing, and there are, you know, places like Oldster, and there are places that are trying to shift that. And, you know, I didn't start writing until my 50s, prose writing. I mean, I was doing theater, you know that. I mean, so this was a huge shift. I mean, my stage text, I have a stage text in here, which is good because that's a whole huge part of my life. And I realize now they're unmasked autistic texts. I had no idea what they were, but now I know. Kind of, well, that's what I think they are now. But like, you know, from the different voices, but you find it's just like, I feel like an adolescent again, because I found out I'm autistic. So I'm looking at, okay, so this is a journal from when I was 17. Okay, this is my journal from a summer when I was 17 at a place called CCY in 1980. So I'm using this as a, like, you know, so I mean, you know, you go back, you go forward, you go all over the shop, right? So anyway, so does that answer your question or statement, or do you, yeah, please keep going, Ara. I can't wait to read your stuff, you know, and I've known Ara forever.
Same.
So
Okay.
Ara is one of the few people that's ever known me as Julie. So there's like 3 people left on the planet, and she's one of them. So yay.
And the idea about you writing about David more, I was honored to have known him, obviously. That's a really wonderful idea. Somebody put that in the chat today. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. I forgot to start it early on, but I will do an intro thing before. But it does start with you, sir. You'll be glad to know.